So I want to take a look at a good example of an overstrider here. So we're looking at the back side of them. On the right, on the back side, this is the right leg, and this is their left leg. So we can scroll down, and this is a person, a pretty high level runner who's coming in for a right knee pain off and on, but really looking for sports performance as well. So if we see and we kind of start to look at this, I want you to just take note of where their initial contact is happening. We're seeing that that foot is landing well in front of the knee. And if we look over here at their numerics page, we're going to start to see that they're landing 33 centimeters in front of the body on the right side and 30 on the left. So if we look at this now, if we look at the other side and we go to initial contact, we're going to see still fairly straight out there, still pretty high foot inclination angle. And this is something that we really want to look at and address. I'll also look at these heat maps, see how they're fairly flat. I really like a teardrop type motion and more of a U-shaped here. So if we just look at this from the side a little bit more, giving ourselves a nice example of this, you can really see what some of these overstriding mechanics look like and even asymmetrical here. So this is a really good example of that. Now let's take a look at what we did after the drills. We took them through some drills to address some of the overstriding mechanics. And at first we're just going to look at what it looks like and see if we notice a difference here. So again, now we're looking at the runner and we're looking at from the behind. This is the right, this is the left. And we're going to start to look at some of the mechanics. We're going to start to see just how some of those heat maps really differed here. This is much more that teardrop that I was looking at. So he did a really nice job of changing some of his mechanics, driving that knee a little bit more. And what we're going to see here is at initial contact now, the foot is much more lined up underneath of the knee. So that's a lot more of what we're looking for. And you see that he brought it down from 33 and 30 strike from center of mass to 27 and 26. So this was a really nice change with him. And I just thought it was a really good example to show people how we're able to change mechanics and see that in real time to make sure that we're having the effect that we hope we are when we do the gait retraining and provide cues. Now, if we look a little more detailed, if we want to start to look at some of these graphs, and we go back to his baseline measure, I want to look at something that's really interesting and something a little bit higher level as we look at him. If we go from the side again, if we bring up some of these graphs, what we're going to look at is where is hip flexion peak occurring during swing phase. So if we open up the graphs and open up hip flexion extension, we're going to look at the right one, which is red. And if we're seeing their peak flexion is occurring, you see this happens slightly after mid-swing. So we're seeing that not really quite, just close to it there, but we're seeing peak hips. So let's look at another one just for some consistency. And again, that peak is happening slightly. This shows it a little bit better where the foot is in front of the center of mass at this point. And that's really a good indication of the forces that are going to be happening on the ground. So again, this is the baseline. And another interesting thing, if we start to look at the angular velocity over time, so which position are they going, we'll see that as they're going into this position, this is showing us, are they flexing if it's above the 0 line or extending if it's below? And what we see is that as he is at initial contact, slightly, we're going to zoom in here, and we're going to see it's negative 105, so that means at about 105 degrees per second starting to extend right at the point, but you can see this is fairly flat. And doesn't really go into extension until about right at this point here. Starts to extend late in the swing phase, which we can see has a big effect there. So now if we look at the same type of graphs after we did some of our drills and our gait retraining, we're going to look at the same thing here again. And as we bring that up, let's look at the hip angles again, and let's look at some of these peaks. And we're going to look at, let's just take this one here. Good. You see how now this peak, the foot is right underneath the center of mass. we want to see this high thigh position as we're going in, because that's going to shift when they start to accelerate backwards. So if you just watch as he goes, you can start to see the acceleration into extension, and this is where you're going to start to see that. And when we pause it at that initial contact, again, that foot's lined straight up underneath. The hip is still partially flexed, which is why we look at this angular velocity for time, and we start to see that now they're extending where it was 105, extending 147. We also see that there's a higher, now where it kind of dipped right before. Now we're seeing that if we zoom in on this, that the dip happens earlier, and we're seeing that he actually got up to 194 degrees per second, so he's extending that leg quicker. So if we go back to right there when the legs underneath of the ground, underneath of the hip, we'll see that they're already starting to accelerate, and he's accelerating that hip backwards more, that's leading to landing in that correct position that we're really looking to see with that foot underneath, closer to the center of mass, and we're seeing that it's 6 centimeters less, which makes a big difference in the long term with this athlete.